There's something about weddings, though, right? The joy, the laughter, the stories, the dancing, and sometimes the unexpected moments that no one plans for. Maybe you've been to one of those weddings when something didn't go quite right. I've been to a few of those. Flower girl refuses to walk down the aisle. The groom's cousin gave a toast that went on and on and on and on and on. Or the cake didn't arrive on time. I had one of those happen. Oh, that was a difficult one. Now, I'm not going to tell you personal stories of weddings because we're live streaming, so I don't want to offend anybody. But you know what happens in weddings. Good and bad and fun and funny and all the things happen. In our scripture today, the wedding in Cana had its own unplanned moment. They ran out of the wine. Now, it may not sound like much, but in that culture especially, hospitality was sacred. Running out of wine was more than just a social slip. It was a crisis of honor and community. And in that moment steps Jesus. Mary notices what's happening and simply says to Jesus, as a mother might do, "They have no wine." She doesn't tell him what to do. She just points out the need. And Jesus' response seems cautious. "My hour has not yet come." So maybe he wants this first sign that people see to be this glorious event, or maybe something controversial or something that just hits home, not just simply helping get wine. Maybe he's beginning to imagine this long list of requests that might start coming his way once people really know who he is. And I don't know if you've ever watched the movie called Bruce Almighty, but there's a young guy and he asks God to give him power, and God gives Bruce God's power to do, and questions on his God computer, prayers start coming in one time, and so he starts answering them, and he goes, "Oh, this is easy," and then they start coming in, and they're so fast that he just gets overwhelmed. And so maybe that was a little bit of what Jesus was thinking. But then Mary turns to the servants and says something in some of the most faith-filled words in this whole story. "Do whatever he tells you." It's as if she's saying, just wait. Grace is about to pour out, for she knew. Then Jesus tells him to fill 6 stone jars, each one capable of holding 20 to 30 gallons. And that's 120 to 180 gallons of wine. That's not just enough. That's abundance. That's like the children's sermon when the water just kept pouring, even though there's no way it could. And when they draw some out, the water has become wine. Not just any wine, but the best wine. So much that the steward even remarks, "You have kept the good wine until now." In that moment, the party is saved, but something deeper happens. John calls this the first of Jesus' signs, revealing his glory. It's not just about wine, it's about the abundance of grace that Jesus brings. The story is more than a miracle of transformation. It's a parable of how God works in us. Where there is emptiness, Jesus fills. Where there is lack, Jesus provides. Where there is despair, Jesus brings joy. It's a story about grace poured out, like the picture up here that's pouring out grace and lovely right into the baptismal font. Grace that is far more generous than we could ever imagine or we could ever deserve. Think of those stone jars, just ordinary jars, giant ones, used for everyday purification rituals. Nothing fancy, nothing sacred. And yet in the hands of Jesus, the ordinary becomes, we've said this many times here, extraordinary. The same is true for us. When we open our lives to Christ, when we trust in him to fill us, when we get baptized, when we join a church, when we sit on a committee, when we do the things that God wants, and we listen and we follow, the ordinary moments of lives become vessels of divine grace. So this is the beginning of Stewardship Sundays, a number of weeks where we'll be talking about stewardship. So what does this have to do about stewardship, you might ask? What does this have to do about stewardship, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Stewardship is at its heart is about what we do with what's been poured into us. We often think of stewardship as just this outpouring from us. Well, I've got enough money, I can give some, right? It's not about that. It begins with the pouring in. When God pours grace into our lives, love, forgiveness, mercy, hope, we don't store it up. We don't hoard it. We don't just keep it. We let it keep flowing. And when it flows into us, it begins to spill out into our families, spill out into our church, spill out into our community. You might say that the stewardship is the practice of passing the pitcher. We've been poured into, and now we pour out into others. When we give our time, when we give our prayers, when we give our presence, our gifts, and our service, we're not just fulfilling a duty, we're participating in the miracle. We're saying, fill these little jars again, Lord, that your goodness might overflow. When we give our time, when we give our prayers, Jesus will continue to fill and fill and fill. Our giving, whether financial or spiritual, is not about scarcity. It's about trusting the God of abundance. The God who turned water into wine can surely turn generosity into a blessing. A generous God calls us to live a generous life. Notice something. Jesus doesn't make just enough wine to get by. He makes more than enough. That's divine generosity. God's grace doesn't trickle, it pours. It's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes. And when we live with that same spirit of abundance, it changes how we see everything. We stop asking, what do I have to give? And start asking, what can I pour out? You stop looking at your finances and say, oh, I can only give this little amount. You say, what more can I do? And it's not just about money, though money's an important commodity for a church to be able to do its ministries. It's about you and your love, your faith, your hope, your joy, all these things. What can you do? Because when grace flows, everybody gets filled. Everybody who walks into this church deserves to be fully filled with God's grace. Even though we may disagree, even though we may do things differently, God fills us and expects us to fill others, especially the stranger, especially someone that we see as the other. Try this year to try to fill generosity out of yourself into the lives of somebody you don't like very much. I guarantee you, you will find a moment of holiness you never thought you could. The miracle at Cana reminds us that God's grace is never in short supply. It comes to us in surprising ways, sometimes through ordinary jars, sometimes through unexpected moments, always through the generous heart of Christ. May we too become vessels of that same grace. May we let God fill us with mercy, hope, and love until our lives overflow. And may our generosity, our giving, our serving, our sharing be nothing less than grace poured out into the world. Next week when we celebrate communion, watch it. Really, really engage in it. It is the very essence of generosity and sacrifice of Christ. Grace poured out. So let's raise a glass, a communion glass, of grape juice in the United Methodist Church, of communion, of life itself, and give thanks to the one who still turns the ordinary into extraordinary. I started in the church as a youth director, and at the time, youth director didn't really make a whole lot of money. We didn't have any benefits. We just were lucky if we could afford McDonald's one night a week. And so I lived very frugally at the time. Well, I tried to live frugally. I overstepped my bounds a few times, and thank God to parents who help out. But I was living a paycheck to paycheck, really, very much so. But in our church at the time, they had a step-up diagram. We're going to use that this year, where they gave levels of money, 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, et cetera, and showed how many giving units, didn't say who, but how many giving units were at each of those levels, and they encouraged us to try to step up on the table. And something came over me when I was a youth director. I was in that low level because I barely had any money, so I was giving it the lowest step. And I said, I want to get to that next step. I don't know why, but just, I want to do that. And at first it was kind of out of duty. Oh, I'm working for the church, I should do that. But then when I finally made it up that step and raised up, boy, it felt good. I said, wow. And I saw the impact. And the next step up, I knew I was one step higher the next year. And then I saw the impact that our giving was having on others. On a mission trip, we were down in South Carolina, I think it was. And we had 120 youth out at the time. And so we had 10 teams. And I was, as a youth director, I went from team to team and get supplies so that they didn't have to drive anywhere. And it was so difficult of a place to find anything that we didn't want our teams driving for hours to go buy materials and whatnot. So I'd be able to go and look at what was going on. And it was an amazing thing. Our church had just come up with so much money that they gave me a whole lot of money and said, just spend it generously. Just be abundant with your giving down there. We don't want you to come back with a penny. It all goes to the people of that area. It was quite a bit of money. And we were with one family who was in a little old 120-year-old home, had no electricity, freezing at night, and you had to, through all the steps, you had to kind of duck down. It was an old farmhouse. And all they ate, and the husband is a husband and wife, the husband had a heart attack a few times, and pretty much all they ate for weeks at a time sometimes were potatoes that they had planted. That was their whole meal. So I'm thinking, okay, how do we help them? And I went to the next place, and there they were raising and selling chickens. And I said, this could be good. So I bought as many chickens as they would sell me, and I said, how much? And they said they're like $25 each, and so we gave them $50 each. We doubled it for them. So we abundantly gave this family money. I said, okay, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to get them tomorrow, and I'm going to bring them to this family that's in need. And they were thrilled. So they gave us an extra free chicken to help out. And then a couple stops later, I noticed this guy had a whole bunch of chicken coops out in front of his house. He was making chicken coops. I said, how much are they? He said, $150. So we gave him $300, and I said, can you deliver it? Because I can't put that in my van, it's too big. And he said, yeah, I'll deliver it. So we bought the giant one that could fit the chickens. And so they were going to deliver it, and their team was going to deliver it. And then I said, you know what? They need something else. How about a goat? Because their lawnmower they had didn't work anymore, and so all these things came up. There were ticks and there were bad things. And I said, how do I find a goat in the middle of these mountains, this area? And so I was driving, and honestly, I wish I had pictures. I should have put up pictures. I was driving, and there was a farmer's market, and in this place, they sold animals. And guess what there was? A goat! So I've got this van, and I said, how much is the goat? And they told me, and I paid it. And I took the goat, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. And they said, that's okay. And they put it in a bag, and so his head was out, and they put it in the back of my car, on my van. There was no seats in the back because I was getting stuff. And I said, I got a goat. I've got a chicken coop. I got chickens. And so they're going to be able to milk the goat, and they're going to be able to, it's going to eat the stuff, so you don't have to buy gas for their lawnmower. And I was thrilled. And so I stopped on my way there at a place. I bought a whole bunch of food to feed the chickens and to feed the goats, and I was feeling pretty good. Well, as I'm driving through, I come up to a stoplight, the only stoplight in like 20-mile radius, and I'm sitting there, and I kind of, slow down, but there's a lot of stuff in the back, and up slides the goat. And it was one of the vans that had this middle that was open, and the goat was sitting right here. So the people who were next to me looking over looked like the goat's driving the van. Okay, so then I kind of push the goat back, and I'm a city boy, I'm a suburban guy. I don't know what, goat, it kind of scared me a little bit, and bite me or something. I push it back, and I drive. The dang goat ate through the bag and got out. So now I'm driving with a goat live in the back, bang, bang, bang. I'm freaking out. So I finally get there, and I get to the place. I pull up, I wave them all over, and I had set it up that there was a team. We had walkie-talkies, and I had a team that was going to bring the big coop, and they were going to bring chickens too. And they were going to bring some of the food, other things too. So they were set up there, and I got out and said, "Hey, come on over." And the team surrounded me, and the family, what's going on? And we said, "Here." And I opened up the back, and we got the goat out, and we said, "Here's a goat." And they went, "And now you can milk it, and it can eat the grass for you." And they said, "Thank you. You're not from around this parts, are you?" I said, "Why?" He said, "That's a male goat. It doesn't." Oops. I said, I'll return it. They said, no, don't. It'll still eat the stuff. We felt bad. We did buy them a female goat later. But, and then I called the other people out, and these groups of the other mission groups that were at other places just came down. They brought out the chicken coop. They brought out the chickens, and we were all in tears. And there's just generosity. We're hugging. And the next day when I went to visit them, they came running up to me, and they're holding up an egg. One of the chickens already laid an egg, and they said, it's the first time we've had eggs in years. Because people from that church said, give it all away. I hope we're going to be that kind of church. I think we are. But we can even do more. Amen.